In this episode of Silver Lining Conversations, I'm joined by my good friend Leland Conway as we discuss identifying hope in the midst of this coronavirus pandemic. I hope you find it helpful, encouraging, and thought-provoking. In the midst of all this kind of craziness going on, you're talking about not having a peace and making a big life decision, but um, like the thing that keeps coming back to me is where are we looking for in hope?
Yeah.
And like I keep coming back to that thing that you wrote it feels like a couple weeks ago, and I think it was like 2 days.
It feels like a couple of weeks now.
But and not to maybe beat a dead horse, but like that idea of like what are we going to look like when we come out of this?
Yeah.
And what are we doing now in order to prepare for that? And
You know what's interesting? In terms of what the nation is going to look like when we come out of this, in a lot of ways, for us as people of faith, it doesn't really matter. Because our hope is in the Lord, and our hope is in whatever His goals are that He wants to manifest in our lives. And the piece that I wrote called Silver Linings. And I was raised in a Christian home. My parents are missionaries, and I was always raised that there was a reason for why America is blessed the way it is. That there was providence in our founding, and that reason was, God doesn't give us riches for us to just go and enjoy, right? He gives us riches at times because He wants us to use those riches to advance His kingdom. Well, it would seem to me to be the same for a country founded on some sense of providence, right? Like if God had some handle or some hand in our founding, then He probably had some mission for us. And it's not that we are in any way superior to any other nation. It's not that we're in any way even all that different. It's just that God had a hand in this, and that this country is meant to help others. And so there's sort of a situation, I think, developing here where we might be called upon as a nation where we are the freest nation in the world, where the most where Christianity is able to thrive the way it does, that doesn't buffet us from hard times. That doesn't keep hard times from coming. What we have is a nation of people where you have a large Christian community that may be being called upon when we come out of this to bring an awful lot of help to a hurting world. I mean, if the world was hurting before, it's going to be hurting a lot worse when we come through on the other side of this. Economically, the devastation, I think, is going to be something that we certainly haven't seen since the Great Depression, potentially even worse than that, And so Christian people have to rest our spirit moments exist for the advancement of the kingdom of God, because that's when people turn to Him, And in a lot of ways, not to be long-winded here, but the other aspect of my piece was that, when I go out into the wilderness, and when I go into these long hikes and I get far away where my cell phone doesn't work, that sort of false wall that man has made between us and God has to come down. And there's this realization of how small and petty and useless I really am. And I think this is bringing that bear on our country. We spent so much of our lives have revolved around taking the best selfie and getting the best angle that shows, look at all the things I have, Insta bragging. Look at all the cool things I have, and look at how pretty I am, and look at all this my best foot forward, and I'm living my best life, whatever that is. Our life is centered around that, and when that gets stripped away, when that technology that allows us to sort of fake our way through life gets stripped away, and we're faced with the fact that we're human beings who are, guess what, vulnerable to a virus. Guess what, vulnerable to predators. Then we have to go, wait a minute, maybe we're not masters of the universe. Maybe someone else is. And maybe I need to turn to Him when those times start to become very clear to me. So that was kind of the crux of what I was writing, and to the point about hope. Our hope is in God. Our hope is in the fact that we have no real role to play in this but what He calls us to. And if He calls us to it, His protection and His help and his power is all going to be in it. So we don't really have anything to fear. in that sense.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, but there's that, but in the meantime, while we wait, hoping for that thing to come to fruition. But there's
Right.
always that journey of getting there. And you mentioned wilderness, and I love that in the sense that it you do realize it's one of the things I like about living in Alaska is I never did tons of outdoorsy stuff. I mean, the extent of outdoors was, that fateful camping trip you referenced a couple days ago.
We did have a good time, didn't we?
We were so
Nothing like waking up
unprepared.
to a drunk guy shooting at you, and all you have is a machete to defend yourself when you're on a ledge.
Oh my gosh. I would never go camping like that again in that unprepared. But I mean, almost at some level, it's a great metaphor for it feels like we're so unprepared for this. And you learn to be prepared for stuff as you go through it. And I think, scripturally, that wilderness wilderness is never a place that you look forward to pitching a tent and staying, but it is a really great place to learn how to thrive. Are you still there?
Right. Yeah. There's a
I'm
little bit
glitchy on me. I'm not sure it was you too.
No worries. No worries. Just repeat the last thing you said there.
Oh, I was just going to say, wilderness is never a place that you hope to just pitch a tent and stay, but it is
Right.
a place that helps you thrive. And so I wonder if we're kind of in a wilderness, coming to terms with who we are, but it's opening possibilities.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's other things that are happening too. Like if you really look around, I don't know how it is in your community, but in the community that I live in, there is a congenialness, there's a kindness that seems to be showing up in people. I haven't seen anybody fighting over toilet paper. I get a little frustrated that they buy it all every morning, but in terms of actually fighting over it, I don't think I've seen anything like that. And if anything, I've seen people being more helpful. And there's this trail etiquette that's developed at some of the trails that I go to around my community where, you give each other a wide berth, but in doing so, you're compelled to have a conversation so that you don't make the other person feel like a leper. And so there's all these funny trail conversations that have ended up happening when I've gone hiking, where you'll just end up in a circle of people all 6 feet apart. And you're talking, and there's this conversations going on, but there's just a kindness and a graciousness that sort of has come out of it. One of the things that I had a good friend of mine that had this quote, and it's really stuck to me. And if I can kind of go on a little diatribe here,
Yeah.
He said, people don't rise to the occasion, fall to their highest. And I thought that was really fascinating because when you strip everything down, your highest level of character is what you default to. It's not that we see people rising, it's that that's who they are. And I don't think our current level of character is always our last level of character. We can get better character, but we default to our current highest level of character. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I was listening to this podcast the other day about a wilderness adventurer, and he talked about how if you look at life on a scale of 1 to 10, and 1 is the worst day of your life. It's the day you lost your mother. You lost a loved one. You can never get them back. It's a level of grief that is so deep and strong and powerful. And number 10 is the ultimate amount of joy that a human being is capable of possessing, right? And he said, most people live their lives between 4 and 6. It's pretty easy in modern America, in modern first world society, to live between 4 and 6, to not be too awful bad off and not be too great on the other end, but just be 4 and 6. You can avoid the 1s for the most part if you're stuck between 4 and 6, but you never see a 10. And so here's back to your point about what is our hope. This is clearly a 1 for our country, right? This is clearly as bad as it can get, which means there has to be a 10 on the other side of this. And that's our hope. Our hope is, let's default to our highest level of character, assess that, and then try to achieve higher character. And when we come through this on the other side, let's shoot for a 10. America's had a lot of ones and a lot of 10s. So we have another 10 coming our way if we choose to look at it. And I think that 10 only comes if that scripture that we always like to cite in times like this is, if my people will humble themselves and pray and admit their sins and beg for forgiveness, I'll heal their land. And I think there's that waiting for us if we're willing to do it.
Yeah, and that's the piece that it's really hard to almost call people to that space. You're really doing crappy, and now we want you to embrace how bad you're doing, because it's
Right.
almost counterintuitive. Like, we
Right.
immediately want to go to the 10. And
Right.
like, I think just kind of reference, in the last couple of years, a lot of personal sorrow. And my tendency is like, this is awful, I want to go to the 10.
Right.
And I really felt, and like in some of that, God saying, no, I need you to sit in this for a little bit. You have to feel this, not to make it worse for you, but so you can not constantly keep coming back to this and not grow.
Right.
And that's kind of what I was suggesting is, not only do we need to hope for what's to come, and I agree with you that, my people called by my name would humble themselves, but there's also that piece of like, who's going to be caring for the soul of our country? And this again is that space that I think the church has neglected and really has an opportunity to step into.
Yeah.
And but it seems like everybody's looking around like, who's going to do this? And it's like, that's part of the reason why I wanted to reach out to you, because I wanted to just kind of have these type of conversations, because I think people are looking for that.
Yeah. And you're doing something that is innovative as a pastor, and recognizing that, right now during this, we can't have the traditional types of ceremonies. And I get a little disappointed sometimes when I look across the scape and I see these news stories about a pastor in Florida who got arrested because he kept holding services. And I don't want to see a pastor ever be arrested, but dude, no one is threatening your church in the sense of, they're not saying you can't be a church right now. They're saying no one can have a gathering of 100, 200, 300 people, because you'll yesterday. You know this about me from being my roommate. I was raised on an Indian reservation in southern Arizona. My parents are missionaries. And on the Navajo reservation, my best friend from high school actually works for the government there on the Navajo reservation. They are getting slammed by this. Now, this isn't the church's fault. They had a day of prayer on their reservation, and there was a gathering of literally hundreds of souls that came together, and a pastor at that event had it. He didn't know it. It wasn't on purpose. That was the start on that reservation. And so as pastors doing innovative things, this is a way our church can actually grow, because there's people that are hungry for some hope. And you can go, you know what? We can't meet in our sanctuary this week, but we can do a Zoom video. We can do a virtual service, and we can reach infinitely more people. And then when this whole thing gets behind us, those people can come into our fellowship and into our sanctuary. And maybe we'll have to build a bigger sanctuary, and that would be awesome, right? So I think churches and pastors like yourself that are doing innovative things to try to find ways, how can we reach a hurting nation that is seeking an answer and a hope? Well, now God's given us all these amazing technological tools. We may not be able to use our traditional sanctuary, but man, as Christians, we have no excuse for not utilizing these tools and grabbing these people out there, because they're ripe and they're ready to hear the message. So I think there's an amazing hope in that.
Yeah, no, we use this platform for our services, and in the last 3 weeks, they send out different reports. In the last 3 weeks, the first week, they reported 16,000 salvations.
Wow.
The second week was 28,000 salvations. And then last week was like 32,000.
Wow. That's
now,
awesome.
And then the movement was like, oh my goodness, we've got 60 some odd thousand people in 3 weeks coming to Jesus. How are we discipling them?
Yeah. Yeah.
But what a great question. It wasn't like, oh, wow, we have people come to see Jesus. Great. Well, that's just step one.
Right.
And now it's like, how do we get them plugged in, and how do we create mechanisms for them to build relationship with others? And I've been impressed. I joked with somebody. I said, who knew it was going to take a global pandemic for the church to finally start working together?
Right. But again, isn't that really kind of awesome about the way that God works? Is he's just kind of reminding us, hey, I'm in control here, and you know, I'm going to use you in this time. And I think Christians probably ought to just relax and let God use us in a lot of ways. I mean, find peace in that. Our bills are gonna get paid. There's gonna be food on the table. What can we do to help those around us who haven't got that assurance?
Yeah, for sure. Cool. We could go on for a while, but
and you know what I'd like to do? I'd love to do this again. I'd love to do this again. I think we absolutely should do it again.
Right on. Very cool. And thank you for joining us for this episode of Silver Lining Conversations. I hope you join us next week as we continue discussing this topic of hope amidst crisis. May the Lord bless and keep you until we meet again.